Hi, I'm Elle, and today we're going to get right to the heart of Dramageddon 2.0. And yes, it's still the Me Too edition, and yes, I really think you should watch my previous video first so you guys get all the context. Since that last video, a lot has happened. Nikita Dragon posted a video on YouTube that capitalised on the drama to make some AdSense money and promote Dragon Beauty. James Charles uploaded a 40+ minute video addressing everything. Jeffree uploaded a video where he apologised for going off the way that he did. Tati Westbrook unlisted and now deleted the original video that sparked this whole drama and posted a statement on Twitter. So that's it. James is vindicated, Tati is a money-hungry leech, and Jeffree was the master manipulator behind the whole thing because he's envious and evil and thank you next. Only, if you believe that, then you haven't been paying attention. As a side note, if you haven't watched James' full No More Lies video, you should watch that first because I promise I'm trying to make this video as short as possible. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. As we established in the last video, James Charles created an apology to Tati while he left fans waiting at his pop-up shop meet and greet in Australia for about 2 hours. I don't know about anybody else, but if I were blindsided by a video that had horrendously false accusations that hurt me, I wouldn't just give a blanket apology. At the very least, if I were James in this situation, I would have said that there was miscommunication and there were jokes that had been misconstrued. But James didn't deny a single thing that Tati said, and that's huge. And I want you guys to bear that in mind while we go through the rest of the video. So, James then basically wanted to get into his PR-crafted receipts because he wasn't happy that neither Tati nor Jeffree backtracked on their allegations. The first big issue that James talks about is the Coachella situation. You guys can go and watch T-Spill's video where she explains how he lied to her about the Sugar Bear Hair Instagram advert and how that came about for more context. James didn't need to lie to T-Spill, but he did anyway. And even though the Sugar Bear Hair situation isn't the biggest deal in the universe, it does show his character. It tells me that he knew the difference between what looked good and what looked bad, and knowing how massive T-Spill's audience and influence is, it tells me that he's more than capable of knowing just how to manipulate his audience. When James talked about the advert, he included an exchange with Tati, and there are a few things that nobody has really been talking about. James lied to her. Aside from the fact that James cares so little for his followers and subscribers that he was happy to offer an advert to get what he wanted from a company and product that he didn't like and didn't believe in, he painted the situation to Tati as Sugar Bear Hair swooping in to the rescue in exactly the same way that he did to T-Spill. What I find particularly disgusting is that in this video, James finally told the truth about Sugar Bear Hair, but he's so arrogant and selfish that he showed off how he lied to Tati in private, someone that he supposedly loved and cared about, without any remorse. It's like he didn't understand that lying to a friend was wrong. What's even worse is that James tried to make Tati sound crazy for her stating that she didn't believe his story. Because that story wasn't believable. James made it sound like he was at the festival, that Sugar Bear Hair pulled him to one side and gave him an ultimatum, and he panicked into agreeing, which obviously wouldn't make sense to Tati. But if she had known that James had reached out and made an offer through Nikita Dragon, it would have made sense. There's nothing like gaslighting to try and make a woman look crazy, right? Even though it was obvious that James knew how upset Tati was, he then went on to tell her that he was thinking about therapy and that his thoughts had been dangerous recently. Right after hearing how upset she was, that kind of manipulation and guilt-tripping is gross. If that's how he was feeling, that's horrible. But it was wrong of James to deflect like that, as though that excused his actions. Although James did talk about the difference of opinion over whether he supported Halo Beauty enough and the dig towards his mother, I'm honestly not interested. Although I will say that James mentioning that his mother is a cancer survivor, which is great and all power to her, was pointless and manipulative, especially when his mother is still throwing shade. But I really need to quicken the pace because we need to get to the meat of James' video. When James gives his side over the allegedly inappropriate conversation at Tati's birthday get-together and mentioned that he was a virgin, I was so frustrated. James being a virgin doesn't stop him from taking part in predatory behaviour when it comes to relationships and intimacy. What is interesting is that James denies Tati's accusation that the conversation was explicit and stating that Tati deliberately twisted an inside joke to make him look bad. Let's say that James is telling the truth and that Tati ended up being offended by what was meant to be an innocuous joke. Considering how massive the Me Too movement is, where people were horrified that President Trump bragged that women would let him grab them by the pussy because he was famous, that was a joke in really poor taste. James says that the inside joke is famous, meaning good, and included receipts of people using that term in that context, showing that Tati took part in it in that context. But that was nothing like the birthday conversation had to have been. So knowing that the alleged joke happened thanks to James being angry that Tati twisted it, how else would Tati have taken any kind of version of, I'm James Charles and I can have straight men because I'm famous? James admitted that it was rarely said aloud in public because he knew that it sounded bad, so it obviously wasn't appropriate, and if James joked like that, then it would make sense that other people around him would feel uncomfortable. What I don't understand is why James is so defensive about the joke. I could understand frustration, but it would have been easy for him to go on camera and just explain that. Instead, he had to be entirely innocent and the real victim instead of admitting that it was something that could be easily misconstrued. And that is all on the presumption that James is telling the truth and that it was just a joke that didn't go over well, because if he's lying, then that was disgusting. With that out of the way though, it's time to get to Sam, the waiter. James is really clever. He shares the first DMs with Sam where Sam says that he's bi to make Tati look like a liar. But even in those DMs, Sam admitted that he had never been with a man before. And of course, James saying that Sam looked very, very straight, which I guess is why James was attracted to him in the first place. They kissed, Sam wanted to leave, James asked Sam to stay, Sam left and the DMs were fine. And then James pulls a bait and switch.
Point being, everything that happened in the hotel room was 100% consensual, and this is confirmed.
I said yes.
By the only two parties that were actually there being myself and Sam.
The biggest reason that James lost so many subscribers was because he was accused of predatory behaviour. But with what I've seen on Twitter, a lot of people don't know what predatory actions and behaviour actually are. A lot of people seem to think that a predator has to be a rapist or sexual assaulter, and that simply is not true. James pushes that harmful belief by reinforcing that what happened between himself and Sam was consensual, as though it being consensual meant no predatory behaviour, no coercive or guilt-tripping behaviour designed to have someone pressured into turning a no into a yes could have happened. In Sam's interview with Kavos, Sam explicitly states that he does not think that James is a predator. What's concerning though is that he says this.
Well, I mean, I did feel a lot of pressure, and it did take a lot of, like, hey, I really want to go home. For him to
Did
like,
it really?
Like it took like 20 minutes of me saying like, hey, like I want to go, and then he'd be like, but please stay, and then I'd be like, fuck, like.
Okay.
I'm like.
So did he ever? Yeah.
Not like trapped. That's a bad word. I don't want to use trapped, but I felt pressure to stay, and I didn't want to like disappoint him.
It is more than reasonable for someone to ask someone else to stay, or when they're told that the other person wants to go, then ask if they're sure that they don't want to stay, or that they wish the other person wasn't going. What isn't reasonable is for someone to beg someone to stay for 20 minutes, especially if they've already guilt-tripped about how much a hotel room cost them in the first place. There's double-checking and wishing the person would stay, and then there's finding it difficult to accept that no means no. Considering that in the rest of that interview, Sam admitted that he jumped on the bandwagon and that he and James were on good terms, it doesn't make sense to me that he would lie about that, especially when he doesn't treat it like a big deal when I see it as a red flag. When James shared texts from Sam, they created a storm on Twitter because the dates didn't make sense. How did James' messages jump from the 2nd of May to the 3rd of May, then back to the 2nd of May? James' explanation that he took screenshots in both the US and in Australia didn't make sense, and I'll be honest, I thought they were faked. But then Sam confirmed in the interview that they were real. Why cause the confusion in the first place though? James had all the text messages. He could have taken newer screenshots so there was no confusion at all. Unless James deliberately posted confusing screenshots to have other people doubt him. Because then, when they were proven correct, that would give him more credibility as well as a reason to drag out the drama for as long as possible. It's underhanded, it's manipulative, and I can't prove it, but that's the theory that makes the most sense to me. In that interview, Sam also claims that James lied about when exactly he invalidated Sam's sexuality, and that it was much earlier in their conversations than James claims. Also, James could try and make himself look better. But James is very good at manipulating his audience. He included a screenshot of Tati making a tasteless, classist joke, and then tried to paint that as Tati being fine with the situation between himself and Sam, even though the text was dated the 21st of February, which was before the incident with Sam in the hotel room, and obviously before the conversation between James, Tati and Gabriel in the kitchen. Tati said in her video that she made excuses for James at her birthday dinner, so it makes sense that they were still talking normally throughout February. She was surprised to hear about Sam in the text, so obviously James hadn't said much about them speaking or the content of their conversations, since he has to clarify that he and Sam had been talking every day.
There was one night in my kitchen where Tati, James, and Gabriel all came over, and I told them the same exact story and showed them the same exact screenshots that all of you guys just saw. After hearing this, like Tati said in her video, Tati and James actually did have a heart-to-heart conversation with me about the boys that I get involved with. They told me that talking to curious guys was going to continue to get me hurt, and that also it could look really, really bad from an outside perspective if somebody tried to manipulate the situation. And for me, this was a major, major wake-up call that I took to heart, because I honestly had never thought about it in any other way, because I knew that everything that I was doing was always consensual between both me and the boy, and I had receipts to back it up. But I wish I knew at the time that Tati's advice was really a warning, because she did exactly what she told me someone else may, which was tell my story with no details, no facts, and no proof, and twist it around, and now serious allegations have surfaced that could permanently damage my career.
James went out of his way here to try and make Tati look calculating and evil, but there isn't any contradiction from our original video. He even threw in the word consensual again, but Tati never said that James was a rapist or assaulter. Remember, we've seen James go from a fake apology video not denying anything that Tati said to him, now accusing her of being so vicious that she would lie about being disgusted at his words. Of course, James isn't just angry at Tati, he's also angry at Jeffree Star. He included a clip where Jeffree talked about quote-unquote straight men who were entirely into him but wanted to keep relationships a secret. That's an entirely different situation to someone that says things like this.
I got a speeding ticket one time because I left school early to go pick up a straight guy that went to another school that I knew was on the DL to hook up with him.
You have an issue with straight boys.
I do.
You need to
really
work it
bad.
out.
I'm working on it, girl.
You have to be able to find a masculine gay guy.
I mean, there are a million of them, but there's no challenge in that.
That's never gonna end in a relationship.
Well, not with that attitude, it won't.
Where James lies like this.
Yes, as a gay man, I am attracted to men, and in the past, whenever I have found a guy cute on Instagram or on social media, I have slid in the DMs with a simple hello or a nice compliment. If anybody ever made it clear that they were not interested or were not gay and didn't want to talk, I always apologized for the unwanted attention, and the conversation was put to a halt immediately.
Because we've all seen this DM.
I'd like to pose a question to you, the audience, and ask, why is it okay for Zara Larsson, a woman with a public platform, to tweet these photos of a shirtless man and say, who are you, where do you live, how old are you, why are you so fine, and how do you like your eggs cooked in the morning? But for me, as a gay man, to DM the same person in private with a simple compliment is predatory. These stereotypes around gay men have been and continue to be very, very harmful to the community and have been historically used to villainize gay men in society.
This infuriates me. A lot of James stans have jumped to say that it's homophobic to criticise James for being predatory because there's a gross homophobic stereotype that paints gay men as predators. The stereotype is disgusting, but just because a stereotype exists, that should never excuse an individual's bad behaviour. Using the fact that he's gay as a shield against criticism is wrong. But back to Jeffree. I believe that James talked about Jeffree behind his back. In fairness, I think the vast majority of influencers talk behind each other's backs, so that really isn't much of a stretch and isn't that important. Obviously, the tweet that Jeffree sent to James' brother was gross and completely unnecessary. James' brother has nothing to do with anything that James has or hasn't done, and like I've said before, there are a lot of times where Jeffree needs to take a breath and calm down. No argument against James there. But we really need to address Jeffree's texts to James, and I want to go through them carefully. With how angry Jeffree is in the first one, there are 3 interpretations that people have jumped on. 1. Jeffree made up the accusations to attack and frighten James. 2. Jeffree believed lies that he was told and jumped to the worst conclusions without evidence. Or 3. Jeffree's entirely accurate, but now he's gross and complicit in covering up crimes. But the accusations in that text don't have to be crimes. Let's pretend for a second that Jeffree was accurate. If Grayson told Jeffree something like James kept touching him in his sleep and he felt uncomfortable for months but never said anything, that would sound exactly like Jeffree described it. But it could also be that James climbed into Grayson's bed and even snuggled up to him. It's still not right, but the explanation isn't a crime. As far as Zach is concerned, well, James might simply not have realised that he was being uncomfortably pushy. James has admitted that he's immature when it comes to sex and relationships, so that isn't a stretch, and Jeffree encouraging James and Zach to talk is irrelevant. And we've already talked about the whole trapping situation with Sam, the waiter. James being pushy and dragging out Sam trying to leave for 20 minutes looks really bad. Let's be honest, Zach is Nate's brother and could say anything to support Jeffree, and we've covered that there are different interpretations to James' actions with Sam. The big question is Grayson Dolan. If I were Grayson and Jeffree had told a blatant lie about me to attack my friend James, then I would jump in to call him a liar as soon as I found out to support James. So when I keep checking and keep finding that James and Grayson don't follow each other on Twitter, but Jeffree and Grayson do, I find that really suspicious. Jeffree's final response to James might have been over the top, but we have no idea what he'd been told before. What I do think, after seeing that neither of the Dolan twins followed James, but they do follow Jeffree, is that Jeffree didn't lie. It might have been exaggerated, but considering so many people think that James was vindicated after his video, it doesn't make sense that they would keep supporting Jeffree if he did make everything up, considering how close they were to James.
As disgusting as it is, I have to admit, bringing up Grace and Dolan was pretty clever. At the height of all these allegations and stories going around, both of the twins unfollowed me, not wanting to be associated, and fans started speculating that the rumors could be as to why. Too bad that aside from our pre-planned collaborative jokes that happened in the Sister Squad videos, me and Grayson flirting, nothing ever happened between us. And when all this went down, I knew Jeffree was lying because the twins were two of the first people to call me and make sure that I was okay.
Surely James would know that Jeffree was lying because he knew that he didn't do anything that could possibly be bad with Grayson, right? Why would James only know that Jeffree was lying because when Tati first put her video up, they asked if he was okay? Neither of the Dolan twins follow James again, but they follow Jeffree, so that doesn't make any sense at all, especially with James saying that Jeffree was clever, because that means that reading that panicked James. It's almost like there could have been something that he knew was wrong. The text from Jeffree to James' best friend Drew Scott was something else though, and Drew liking tweets against both Tati and Jeffree show where he stands. It's pretty well known that Jeffree blasts first and regrets later, but that accusation seems to go far too far and should never have been sent without Jeffree having both concrete proof and talking to the authorities. Because that is a serious accusation, and if there are victims, they need to be supported, and if there aren't, nobody should ever be called that. Considering Jeffree's video, where he stated that other people were in his head telling him things about James that he believed, it makes sense to me that the strike first and think later Jeffree blew up and texted without proof and without thinking. I will not ever condone that with something so serious. There have been accusations floating around about James from someone that alleged to have been at school with him that Jeffree may have heard, and that explains the backtracking on the more vicious things that he said in private, about sending James to prison and calling him a paedophile. I'm not going to address James saying that he was in a dark place, or cynical additions that he thought about suicide, because I'm sorry, but that felt scripted to me, and I don't think the rest of the video is particularly relevant. James repeats that he's angry that there were so many lies about him, but he wants to check his ego. James showed in his video that he sees no problem with lying and manipulating to protect himself. He still stands by Nikita Dragon and Gabriel Zamora, despite them clickbaiting this massive scandal to promote Dragon Beauty. He tried to pressure Gage Gomez into signing a non-disclosure agreement immediately without talking to a liar, even after already stating that if Gage lied, he would be sued, which is really suspicious. He only decided to speak on Sam again after Sam lied and said that he was gay. There have been allegations that he would marked his Tinder as female to show off to straight men, which would explain why he was kicked from the app, and lines up with his own words that he treats straight men as a challenge. Maybe you don't agree that James' pressuring, obsessed with turning straight men gay antics are predatory. It's a difficult one, since all that we can go on is what's said in public, and we don't really know any of these people. But it doesn't make sense to me that Tati would tell outrageous lies for money when she knew that James could easily destroy her. It doesn't make sense to me that Jeffree would send vicious texts with allegations out of nowhere when he could be outed as a liar with a single sentence from Grayson Dolan's mouth. It doesn't make sense to me that the Dolan twins would follow Jeffree, not James, after this scandal. What does make sense is James doing anything and everything that he possibly can with his PR team to protect his ego and his brand. He obviously doesn't care about his subscribers, since he sold them vitamins that he hated and didn't believe in for selfish reasons. And he doesn't even have the courage to admit in the very least he made tasteless jokes that weren't understood to be jokes by others. He might have said that he cut ties with Jeffree Star's killer merch, but the sudden lack of sister merch will be a major factor into why James' tour has now been cancelled too. And if Jeffree really were only in it for the money, then it doesn't make sense that he would want to lose out on all the money that James would make for him with that merch either. So, do Tati and Jeffree deserve to be dragged? Yes. Tati does for the gross false copyright strike she launched, and Jeffree does for going far too far, which was completely unacceptable. But James is the major problem throughout this scandal. His entitled attitude to straight men and relationships, his lies, his manipulation, and it genuinely worries me that a hatred towards Jeffree Star has clouded so much of this scandal. So take a second and look at the bigger picture. Because if James' ego and behaviour isn't checked, well, that is a lot of very young subscribers that he's busy influencing. As always, like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, or don't do any of those things because I'm not your mother. And, as we say in The Sims, Dag dag.